morning, or good afternoon rather. Thank you all for coming out. I'd like to announce our bookseller for today is Poe & Company, and I urge you all to support our local booksellers by purchasing your copy of Marie's books from them today. Marie Bostwick is a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of more than 20 works of fiction, uplifting contemporary and historical fiction. Marie's books have been translated into dozens of languages. Her novels are beloved by readers across the globe. 3 of her books were published as Reader's Digest selected editions. Marie lives in Washington State with her husband and a beautiful but moderately, but that's a bit of a less than an exaggeration, moderately spoiled Cavalier King Charles Spaniel. All of us dog owners know it, they're all spoiled. Our moderator today is Jessica Handler. She is an acclaimed author of award-winning novels and celebrated nonfiction. She has features on NPR, in Tin House, Electric Literature, The Bitter Southerner, The Washington Post, and elsewhere. Please join me in welcoming Marie and Jessica.
Marie, thank you for being here, and thank you for the introduction, and thank y'all for being here. The book club for Troublesome Women is such a fun, engrossing, and impactful read. And when I finished it, and this doesn't happen a lot with books, I wanted to go right back to one and start over. I loved it, and I told you I've referred a couple of my students to it. So that was fun too. But I wanted to ask if you would read for us to start.
I would love to do that. That's easy. I don't have to think very hard because I did the thinking first. But first, thank you all for being here, and thank you to the Duluth Library for hosting me today. I'm so proud to be here. Oh, I just sounded like Minnie Pearl there, didn't I? I'm just so proud to be here. So, yeah, and indeed I am. So, I just wanted to read a little bit from one of my characters from chapter 1. There are 4 major characters, but Margaret is the one I introduce you to first, so I'll read a small section from that. Chapter 1, Members of the Club. On a Wednesday morning in March 1963, 25 miles and yet a world away from the nation's capital and the rumblings of change that were beginning to be felt there, in a Northern Virginia suburb called Concordia, so new that the roots of the association-approved saplings were still struggling to take hold, and so meticulously planned that when the first wave of residents moved in the year before, the shops, library, and church opened on the very same day, as if God smote the ground and a fully formed suburb had erupted from the crack, Margaret Ryan stood in a sunny kitchen with appliances and matching Formica countertops of egg yolk yellow, trying to decide what to serve to the 3 women who would be coming to the first meeting of her new book club. Beth Ryan, 11 years old, and the eldest of Margaret's 3 children, peered over her mother's shoulder, shaking her head at the small mountain of recipes Margaret had torn from her extensive collection of women's magazines. Why so many? Why not just bake oatmeal cookies and be done with it like any normal mother? Beth snatched a recipe clipping from the stack. Anchovy and cream cheese canapes? If that's dinner, I'm eating at Melanie's. Every family has its smartass. Beth was theirs. With her strawberry blonde hair and enviably long lashes, Beth was the image of her father, but her cheek was pure Margaret, and a payback, Margaret was sure, for the sins of her youth. When her own mother was still alive, she had cursed Margaret countless times, saying, "When you grow up, I hope you'll have a daughter that's as fresh as you, then you'll know." Now she did know, and it wasn't so bad. Margaret liked it that her daughter knew her own mind and wasn't afraid to speak it. It was an underappreciated quality in women and one that often faded with age. At age 17, Margaret had sworn that she would grow up to be nothing like her mother. After a promising start, the fruit of her early efforts had shriveled. Now, at age 33, Margaret sometimes wondered if every woman was destined to become her mother eventually. Recently, however, things had started to change, and not just for Margaret. As with any seismic occurrence, the impact would be felt more keenly by some than others, and the responses to it would vary widely. Some would embrace the change. Some would decry it. Some would avert their eyes and pretend that nothing had happened. It didn't come all at once, of course. Meaningful change rarely does. There would be more rumblings, more waves, more altercations in the decades to come. But in the fullness of time, no one could deny that landscapes and lives had been irrevocably transformed. Nevertheless, Margaret didn't appreciate that fully yet. Neither did she understand that the impulses she had given into over the last 3 months and the secrets she kept, including the presence of a rented seafoam green typewriter she had hidden in the far reaches of the linen closet, would alter her family, her future, and her sense of self.
Thank you for that. You hint at so much in that opening paragraph. It's wonderful. The book club for Troublesome Women is dedicated to your mother. And this first paragraph that we just heard has a lot to do with mothers and mothering. So I wanted to know if you'd talk with us a little bit about how our mothers and our mother figures might have influenced who we become as women.
Well, it's certainly been the case for me as I have told this story, and it's really pretty wonderful. The whole idea from the book came from my mother, who is a pistol and 92 years old. And 3 years ago, we were talking about books. She's a big reader. And she said, you know, the Feminine Mystique came up, which I had not read. And she said, well, I don't know if I ever told you, but that book changed my life. And so I asked her to tell me, and within seconds, I got like the chillometer, as we authors refer to it. You know, you just know that you're onto something. So my mother's, you know, I think every mother, for good or for ill, is going to influence her daughter. I know many people who we spend a lifetime getting over our mothers. For me, I've spent a lifetime trying to live up to my mother.
Same.
Yeah, she is quite amazing. And she, you know, in our family, she just was always for things. You know, she was by the time I got to be old, about 5 years old, my father had left the family. And so my mother was raising 4 daughters alone, and we were pretty impoverished. And one thing I think back on that, you know, she did for me, we had no money. So there was no reason to suppose that she could do it. But yet she never said to me, if you go to college. It was always just when you go to college. So I grew up just assuming I would go to college, but I knew I had to do it. And so, you know, I figured out how. And she just instilled me with the confidence that somehow I'd figure out how to do it. Recently, we were at Mother's 92nd party, and my oldest sister talked about she had had her travels in the wilderness as a woman, but that my mother was never pushing, but she did it that way, as like a gesture. It was a hand on my shoulder. And that's been everything.
I love that. Thank you. You know, you talked about your mother saying that she'd read The Feminine Mystique, the Betty Friedan book. And I have 2 questions, one of which is, did you read it or reread it to write this book? But before we get there, can you tell us a little bit about the role that The Feminine Mystique plays in this narrative?
Well, you know, this is a book club, and the books that the characters are going to read over the course of a year, there are many books, the books of the time, and I had a lot of fun researching what would women perhaps have been reading in this period, and particularly trying to find the ones that I thought would match with this group of characters that might have something to say to them. But it does all kick off with The Feminine Mystique, and it's important as sort of, even for the characters who are quite frankly not that excited about the book or the book club. You know, who has ever had a friend rope them into something? So at least one of my characters has just gotten roped into this. She's not a big reader, but even she is a homemaker, and she's a mother of 6 and wanted this life. even she sees something there in her first reluctant reading, talking about that she just identified with a woman in the book who talked about having sort of achieved all the, all the milestones of feminine existence and realizing there was nothing left to do. And that really resonated with this particular character. She was too young to have no other mountains to climb. So I think it was very influential for the characters. And then you asked about the influence in general.
Did you, about the influence in general, and then did you reread it?
Oh, goodness. Well, I had never read it. So I've read it many times now. And people, if you haven't read it, and particularly young people, I've been really excited. I've had some younger readers, and some of them are showing up to my events saying, I'm so proud of them that they read, both the novel and the Feminine Mystique, and it makes them so mad. And it should. It made me mad too. So yes, I read it many, many times, and it was really eye-opening. I was alive when it came out, but I was not really cognizant.
Sure.
So yeah, it really gave me a great appreciation for how far women have come. And, for my mother and her generation and all they did to be, as I would say, troublesome in various ways and various levels, so that women today, so that I have the kinds of opportunities I can enjoy.
Yeah. I went back and read some of it after I read it in college, and then I went back and looked at it again after I read your book, and some of the language in it rankled me in terms of terminology, like housewife. But I want to ask you, the women in the book club call themselves the Bettys because of Betty Friedan, who wrote the Feminine Mystique, right? And your four main characters are Margaret, Viv, Charlotte, and Bitsy, and they're very different. Did you have particular women in mind as you crafted our four protagonists?
No, my job is to imagine things. Many years ago, when I sort of first, I wasn't really trying to write, but it's a long story and I'm not going to do it. I sort of, for lack of a better word, I was sort of discovered in a writer's workshop that I just kind of went to for fun. And when the person who had been facilitating this week-long workshop came up to me afterwards and said, so, you're a writer, what have you published? And I said, oh no, I'm a mom, I write grocery lists. And he said, no, you are a writer. And I said, I'm not, I just didn't fire my imaginary friends when I got big. And he said, what do you think writers are? And I think that's true. So I pretty much, these are my imaginary friends, and I like ensemble casts of characters. I like people who are very different, and I like to get them into a room and help them find common ground. If you've read other of my books, that is something I do over and over again. It never ceases to excite me and interest me.
I find I'm doing that too in my own work. I didn't used to, and now all of a sudden I'm doing ensemble casts, and I'm like, oh, I like that.
It is. It's also maybe the hardest possible way to write a novel, but,
Tell us a little bit about these four women. I mean, Viv's a former combat nurse, so give us a little sense of who these women are, how they're different, and then ultimately, Margaret writes, now we are sister travelers on parallel roads. So what makes them that way?
Well, so yes, they are very different. Margaret, you've met. She's 33 years old. She has 3 children. She has, the house in the suburbs and the station wagon and all the things. And she's a bright woman. She went to college, didn't finish. And she is just wondering why having it all just isn't feeling like enough. And she's starting to wonder if, is there something wrong with her? Which, as I did research, I found was a common, feeling among women in this generation. So then we have the next character is Charlotte. Charlotte was the most fun to write. Charlotte is a pot stirrer. I do love a pot stirrer, I really do. Charlotte is pretty frank. She has lived in New York all of her life. She has money, although it's family money. She does not have control of the money. Her husband does, even though he married into the family, and she's been there forever. She has 4 children who she really loves, but she has a sort of fraught relationship with some of them, as sometimes happens when you get teenagers. but she's also very artistic, and she really longs for this artistic life and has met roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. So she's pretty frustrated. And now she has been banished to the suburbs of Northern Virginia. She's not a happy camper when she gets there. Then we have Viv, as I said. Viv is very interesting in that she, you know, when you do an ensemble, there's part of you that thinks, well, okay, not everybody can be the most interesting character. And in my mind, Viv just wasn't going to be the most interesting character. And that turned out to be wrong. She is, of all the women, the one who has had what we would consider a career. She was a military nurse. She served in the European theater during the Second World War. She met Tony, who, you know, looked really, really good in his navy whites. And fell in love, and she really wanted to have a family. As she points out at one point in the book, she says, you know, she has 6 kids. She's like, this didn't happen because I'm a heavy sleeper and Tony is stealthy. I picked this. So I love her in that she's really no nonsense, but she's also, though initially probably the least intellectually curious, she will travel a big road in some ways with wider horizons than all the others in a sense. And then we have Bitsy. Bitsy is my young one. I love to have a young one. She's just 23. She hasn't been married too long. She's trying to have a family. She's very, 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 very bright. Grew up in Lexington in horse country. Her dad was a barn manager for a quite well-known stud farm. And so, of course, how could this girl fail to grow up to be horse crazy? She just was, loved animals, wanted to be a vet, and studied very hard to try and make that happen. But at this time in history, there were a lot of roadblocks to that. So she has done what many women did of the period, what she thinks is the next best thing. She married a veterinarian. So that's who they are. It's a brand new neighborhood, and part of the reason I wanted to have this development there in Concordia, because everyone's new. And having moved around a lot myself, I know that when you move into a brand new neighborhood, everybody's taking applications for friends. And so they're looking around trying to find who their people are. And though they're quite different, this does. And remind me, I talked too much. The second part of the question was?
You know what? I kind of forgot.
Okay, see, me
no,
too.
but that's not bad because
Me too.
I just wanted you to tell us who the women were, and this goes to another part of the question, actually, which is they all change in very significant ways. I'm thinking about 2 instances. One, Margaret watching Charlotte do a thing at the local drugstore makes her wonder what it's like to not be afraid to, quote, stir up trouble. And then Margaret later on stirs up a little trouble because she can't deposit a paycheck because the Equal Credit Opportunity Act was not passed until 1974, a decade after this story takes place, approximately. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how some of these women change, because we know in a well-written book, everybody has to change.
Oh, yes. They do all change, and I think they all change for the better, and they change in different ways. But I would say the thing that they discover was the strength they did not know they had. Oh, nice. It was there all along, but they really needed those. Oh, that was it. You said the sisters traveling the parallel road. Right. Now, so, you know, parallel, not the same road. You see what I'm saying? That was a very deliberately chosen word. It's not, they're not on the same path, but they're going together. And you know, having those companions for the journey, I think, is what gives them the courage to make what for some of them could be quite frightening changes. In some ways, I think Charlotte, though she is the boldest, makes the most potentially scary choice. And she does that. And I don't know, some circumstances fall her way that make that happen, but I'm not sure if she hadn't had these friends alongside her all this time, kind of helping her realize that she is more than society or she or her family in particular had told her she was, she would have found that courage.
Charlotte matures emotionally really, really a lot. And I want to veer away from something. I'm jumping around in my questions, and I love that because that gives us a conversation. But, you know, one of the things I'm thinking about is that the husbands were trapped too.
Yes.
You know, and this book is very much about these four women and the world in which they live. But the husbands are not bad guys. Well, there's
some
one.
of them,
Okay,
some of them
one
are.
is.
Some of them are.
But one is. He does a bad thing. But talk about how husbands were trapped too.
Well, and this is something, when I finished the book, you know, all right, I'm going to digress for just a second. I swear I'll get that. So I have not used that word as much, but as I've been traveling around talking to people, the word feminism keeps coming up. I have avoided that word because for some people, it can have such a negative connotation. It doesn't for me. But as I learned, you and I, Kate and I, we're both communications majors. So
I was too,
okay.
undergrad.
All right, so my undergrad was in communications, and my communications major professor made my head explode when he said the following thing. I've never gotten over it in front of the class. Words have no inherent meaning. No, it is true. A word in and of itself has no inherent meaning. The word means two things, actually. What the sender believes the word means, but it also means what the receiver believes the word means, and those can be different, which means communication is really a hard thing to do well. It's just, right? I mean, it was like, wow, I had walked around campus for like 3 hours thinking about that and feeling doomed. So to me, the word feminism is just women lifting up and supporting other women, which is what I have done all my life and which is what I have been so happy to have received in my life. For some people, feminism means you don't like men. I adore men. I've been married 43 years. I have 3 sons. I'm super proud of them. So it was really fun for me when I turned the book in. My editor said, "Oh, Marie, I love it, and I'm so glad you didn't write a, what was it? Oh, a she-man boy-hater book." So getting back to the husbands.
Yeah.
What I kind of thought about as I was looking in my own life and my own marriage is we've really had a partnership for 43 years. And having had a partnership means that I have been allowed to chase my dreams, but there have been times when I've been able to say to him, "You go, I've got this." Yeah. And I am the one sort of keeping the home fires burning and keeping the finances going and all of that stuff. And when I first started writing, I wasn't very good at writing men. And I finally realized I got to get better at this. And so I sat down and interviewed my husband. And I did. I was like, "What's your world like? Tell me what keeps you up at night. What is your..." And I really found, you know, that it was like that thought that it's all on you. Yeah. That the finances, that everything is all on you and you got to keep it going. So in Margaret's world, you know, at this moment, her husband is like, it's all on him because he has to be the breadwinner and the sole breadwinner, and that's the thing. And
that's a lot.
It is a lot. It is a lot. So in some way, that very stultifying, you know, roles of what men and women should do, really it was just as much of a trap for him as it was for her. And there was a better way.
Yeah. I appreciated seeing that in this book too, because I should interview my husband. I also loved, somebody asked me the other day, how do you write men characters well? And I said, men are people. Yeah, and it's like, yes, they are. You were gonna add to that?
Oh, I was just saying they're people, but they're not all, but many men are people who are less willing to talk about how they feel about things, which is why you have to sit down and interview your husband to figure out what's going on.
You know, the research throughout this book is terrific, and I love research, and it's so well deployed, it doesn't come across as an info dump. And I got to tell you a couple of things that I learned. One, I somehow didn't realize that World War II was within recent memory of adult women, adult people in the early 1960s. Sure. It was right over their shoulder.
Yeah.
Also, I didn't know that NCR made airplane parts during the Second World War.
I did have to learn that, yes.
And
NCR's National Cash Register, so they switched over to making airplane parts.
If you've ever used carbon paper, oh, I'm so old. Yeah, the same. But you know, one of the things I love in my writing and in all writing is the research rabbit holes, the places that you went down a rabbit hole and learned stuff that you did or did not use. Tell us a couple of your rabbit holes.
Oh gosh. Well, the National Cash Register thing was kind of one, because it's like, how are you trying to, figure out what it was Margaret's mom was doing during the war. Oh, I'm trying to think more things.
Minimum wage was, quote, $1.25.
Yeah, those were the kinds of things, because you really had to like have a sense of what cost was and make that relative. Like I did research on IBM Selectric typewriters. I got to know quite a lot about IBM Selectric typewriters. Typewriters in general were very important. But the price thing was certainly, I had to figure out like what would, how much money would Margaret have had and what would things have cost? Oh, I sort of knew about it, but I really got interested in green stamps.
Oh, I remember those.
Was able to find old green stamp catalogs and was trying to pick out, well, what might she have been saving for? So that was a fun thing. I did a lot of research because you can't overemphasize how influential women's magazines were to this generation of women. So I bought as many vintage magazines as I could get and afford. Some of them are really expensive from eBay, because I really wanted the physical copies. And I loved the way they smell. They smelled really musty and slightly moldy and kind of fabulous. And I played a little game with myself to see sometimes, this was just for me. Let's see, in this magazine, which is the least appetizing sounding recipe? Oh my gosh, so much mayonnaise, friends, so much mayonnaise.
And Jell-O.
A lot of gelatin, but really for me, the mayonnaise thing was a big, big deal. And, there were no food stylists then. So not only were many of these recipes quite unappetizing, they were badly, badly photographed. They were just really unattractive. One of my favorites is like, there was and this was a Weight Watcher recipe, actually. It was like a crown of Frankfurters. Right? And in a circle, and then it was stuffed with like coleslaw. It was just so disgusting.
How do you even serve that?
You have to want it.
The women's magazine, I want to talk about the woman's place. And I do have to tell you, there's some overlap here, which is, at one point, I think Margaret was reading Ladies' Home Journal. Mm-hmm. At that point in time, my mother worked at Ladies' Home Journal.
Oh, really?
Answering reader questions.
Oh, my gosh.
Before she had her first daughter. There would be me. But Margaret reads and has an interaction with a magazine called A Woman's Place that changes her life. You want to talk a little bit about that?
I do want to talk about it a little bit without giving away too much.
Okay, I did say that.
She does. She ends up having an interaction with the Woman's Place. But the first thing, which I think was interesting, which was like such a marriage thing, is, and it's early on, so I'm not giving away too much. Her husband, and she loves women's magazines. She's got lots of them. And they really, I remember too, McCall's. I used to cut out Betsy McCall paper dolls, So there were so many great things in women's magazines in some ways, the recipes and this, that, and the other. Her husband at Christmas gives her a magazine subscription. And it comes in an envelope, and she sort of thought it would maybe be money to buy furniture, which is something she really, really wants and hadn't been able to do. And so she's disappointed, especially when he's like, oh yeah, I was at the dentist and I saw this. And it just seems like it was such an afterthought. And so it starts kind of an argument that to me felt really, really real and really, so she's like, as we say, as the kids say now, she's not feeling seen.
Yeah.
Right? She's not feeling seen. So, but that magazine subscription, actually, she doesn't know it yet. It's going to end up changing her whole life.
We don't want to give too much away.
No, we don't.
But women's magazines play a very pivotal role here.
Yes. As I was trying to explain, I did a wonderful, wonderful event with a book club, a private book club of about 40 young mothers in their 30s and early 40s. And I was trying to explain the magazines, and I finally went, it was the TikTok of the day. And they all went, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's with the recipes and the styling and the.
Yeah. I mean, just influencing, right?
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, Viv, let me think about this. There are some public figures who appear in this book.
Yes.
Can I say who they are, or do you want to?
I don't mind.
Okay. Katharine Graham, who was the editor and publisher of the Washington Post at the time, and Jackie Kennedy.
Makes a brief, and these are cameo appearances.
Yeah, they're cameos. But they do appear also. Helen Thomas, the
Yes.
late great.
Who remembers Helen Thomas, sitting
was-
always in the front row.
I
of
was
the
so
press
glad to see her
conferences.
in there.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
And the very young Susan Stamberg.
Yes. So you've got these people in here, these women in here, as evidence, if you will, of the rare role models for women, professional women in the era. So will you talk about how important it was for your characters, particularly Margaret, and also Bitsy, and then also Viv and Dr. Giordano, and I'm giving stuff away. But can you talk about the importance in the narrative for these women to come face to face with role models?
Well, I do think it was important, and I think it's always been that way. Women are in fact influenced by other. I mean, we talked about our mothers, but if we're lucky, most of us have probably been influenced at least by a teacher at some point, hopefully for the good. But yes, these women were like doing things and sort of, I think, give them the idea that it's possible to do more. Now, in Katharine Graham's case, her role is sort of thrust upon her. 1963 is when this book is primarily set, and 1963 is, in fact, a pivotal year for Katharine Graham. It is the year her husband tragically ends his life, and she then picks up the mantle. Even though it was her family's newspaper, it was never thought that Katharine would take the reins, even though she had worked at the paper before she was married. It was always going to be her husband who married in, who took over the business. So he's gone, and it's a family paper, and she becomes the publisher. And with this, she becomes the first American woman who is the publisher of a major newspaper. So it's really, she jumps into those shoes. Yeah. And I do lots of things in this book that I just kind of decided she did.
Yeah.
Because and some people have asked me, do you have to get permission to do that? No. You know why? Because you buy this book in the fiction section. That's why. So, but I think she was, I do get the idea from what I do know about her that she was somebody who did try was a great role model, a great inspiration, and did, to the degree that people were ready. Yeah. Open
she made
doors.
It her business. Yeah. And there's a scene in the book where she literally opens doors to role models.
Right. Yeah. But I will say she also says, you don't just get handed this. You have to earn it. You have to earn it.
Which makes a good mentor.
Yep.
Yeah. Viv works with a woman, Dr. Giordano, who is the first time she sees a female physician. But you bring up something really crucial, I think, in discourse about this topic and about this era, which is that Viv points out that for Dan's book and similar books are directed at people like us, women with choices. And this has long been a discussion about, who gets to act on that mentorship. So why was that important for you to spotlight for these women and for your readers?
Well, because I quickly, I read The Feminine Mystique, and then, of course, I started reading about the feminine mystique. You want to understand the response to the book, the criticisms of the book, and there were a lot of criticisms of the book. Mm-hmm. And if you will indulge me, and I knew that, I wanted to address it up front because the very, very, very first page of my book, before the part that I read you, says this, and I think it's really important. I'll explain why. On February 19th, 1963, a troublesome, imperfect, controversial woman named Betty Friedan published a troublesome, imperfect, controversial book titled The Feminine Mystique. The book didn't solve the problem, but it did put a name to it, shining a light that helped women who felt isolated and powerless to find one another and their voices. That has been the start of every revolution. So knowing as I did that there had been justifiable criticisms of the feminine mystique, one of the major ones of which was lots of people got left out of the conversation. It was really directed to quite a narrow slice of womanhood, white, you know, mostly college educated, middle class women. And so there were lots of other women out there that just, you know, weren't part of it. And Friedan's solution for these women is actually pretty narrow. You know, mostly she's like, get a jobette and volunteer somewhere. I mean, she really, so there's a lot of, but at the same time, it was a catalyst for so much. And so that's why I wanted to say right up front, it's not a perfect book, but it did something important for people. And now maybe I've lost the thread entirely.
No, I was just curious about, because at Dr. Giordano's office, Viv meets Giordano, and then she meets another woman who was an army nurse, and I won't say anymore.
Yeah, and she does, Viv meets another woman who is a nurse, and woman is a Black nurse, and she too served during the Second World War. And this starts to like get Viv thinking about, gee, the feminine mystique is good, but there's a lot of people that got left out. So that was, and it had to be organic and natural to me. It had to make sense within the narrative. I never want to, I don't want to lecture my audience. The story must be served. And so that was a way, I think, to acknowledge something really important in a way that served the story and felt natural to the narrative.
I agree. It worked well. I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions before we go to your questions. So I hope you have some. Let's see. 2 questions. Well, I want to talk about motherhood too, or get back to that. There's a scene where Viv's youngest child, Jenny, does something potentially dangerous. And it turns out okay, but Viv tells her that I will always catch you.
Yep.
And I want to know what role that interaction plays in this story.
I think for Viv, that moment for her is going to realize, for her, and again, all these women are going to find different things, but as much as Viv wants a lot of things out of life, what she has wanted and continues to want most is to be a wonderful mother to her children. And this is a moment, I think, when she realizes that, you know, part of that longing for something bigger is the life she is going to give her children, that she will always be there to catch them. She's going to help them fly. And she feels good about that. Motherhood does play, you know, most of these characters are mothers, and they are loving mothers, though very different. And I think for me, as I saw in my own mother, I guess, is that, you know, in making their journey, they certainly make big changes, but they make even bigger changes for the next generation. And, you know, I was the beneficiary of that.
And we see that in the book. There's every person who has a child, the child does play a role in their trajectory. And that's all I'm going to say. What conclusions do you want readers, those of us in the room and elsewhere, to draw from the book club for Troublesome Women?
I get asked this question quite a lot, and there is so much here, which I think is everywhere I'm going. I can't tell you the number of people, and they're like, my book club is going to read this. And I'm so glad, because there is going to be so much for you to talk about, and I love that. And I do trust readers to figure out how to engage with the material in their own way. However, if I were going to have one thing that I hoped readers would kind of walk away with, it would be something that Margaret writes in the book that for me is the nutshell of the entire story, and it is this. She writes, there are countless good and right ways to be a woman, and only 2 wrong. The first is to assume that your way is the way, the only way. And the second is to buy into that nonsense and spend the rest of your life walking an aimless path in shoes that will never fit.
Ooh, oh, nice. And as a person who loves shoes, exceptionally nice.
Too.
So what haven't I asked you? What's on your mind that you want to tell us?
Honestly, you know, you should, if you don't care for the book, you may keep that to yourself. If you do care for the book, I'd like you to tell every single person you ever met, because honestly, that's that's how it works, you know, like word of mouth is invaluable for authors. So really, I just want to know if they have questions. I'm open to that. You can ask me anything except my age and how much money I make.
Well, let's give Marie a big thank you, and then we will go to questions. Should I walk around with this, or how are we going to do that? With the mic?
I think the answer is yes.
Okay. I can walk around with the mic. Who's got a question?
Oh, someone has to be first.
Oh,
there we
good.
go.
Well, it's not a question, but I just wanted to tell you how much I enjoy your Wednesdays.
Oh,
Book talk.
thank
I
you.
watch it every week.
Thank you. So this lady is telling me about, she's saying she enjoys my Wednesdays, which I love. So I am a co-host of a book podcast called the 10-Minute Book Talk. And I host this with two of my writer friends, Catherine Ray and Rachel Linden. And we've been doing this for, I think, about 3 years now. And it's great. It's the lazy book readers podcast, honestly. When we started it, we were like, well, we're all busy, so we're like 10 minutes. This is the way to go. And we get to talk to lots of authors. We get lots of arcs for new books, which we love. I think it's such a great way because in 10 minutes, you know, we're all busy. People can decide, oh, is this a book I want to find out more about? So I'm glad you enjoy it. It's fun for us. Thank you. If they're in, I'm in.
What was the name of
Oh, it's called the 10-Minute Book Talk. You can find it on Instagram or Facebook, but we also have a YouTube channel. I don't know how it gets to YouTube, but that part's not my job. It's a mystery. Yes.
I also encourage everyone to subscribe to her newsletter and blog because it is so much fun. And she has many interests that will also interest you.
Thank you. So this lady was saying she, man, so I've got to give each of you like $5 later. So this dear lady was saying that she would encourage people to subscribe to my newsletter and my blog. I have a monthly author newsletter, but I have a weekly blog newsletter. And I started writing a blog a while ago. Originally, it was called Fierce Beyond 50 because that thing happened to me once I turned 50. Suddenly people were like, okay, well, you can get off the stage now. And I said, I don't think so. I just got here. So I did that and I said a lot of things. But then after a while, I realized lots of people who weren't in their 50s were coming. And so it was like saying to people, oh, move along now, nothing for you. So now it's just called Fiercely Marie. And I do a lot of things, but a lot of what it is right now is I love to cook. So there's a lot of recipes. And my recipes are far more attractive and appetizing than those recipes in the magazine. So yeah, that's at my website, mariebostwick.com.
No Frankfurter Towers.
There's no Frankfurter Towers. Although I did do a companion recipe for the book, which is, it's actually extremely tasty. It's a smoked salmon spread, but I shaped it like into a fish shape as if it had been, and I used olive slices for scales. It's hysterical. So, anyone else?
Question. So just on your writing style, consider yourself as more of a plotter or a pantser?
So the question was, from my writing style, do I consider myself more of a plotter, as in people who, before they start, begin a big plot, or a pantser, which in writing speak is writers who write by the seat of their pants. I am a plotter of the first order. Not only do I plot, I write. So I have an initial concept for the book. I know how it, I know how it begins and I know how it ends. I don't really know the middle part. And what I actually do when I do an ensemble book like this, I do a separate outline for each character according with them as the hero of the story, because we're all the heroes of our own story. And as I'm doing that, I see connection points and maybe places where the story can trade off. And I learn a lot more about them. Something that's really important, especially, I mean, I need to know their background, but I also need to know what is it they really, really want and what is standing in the way of them getting it. And then really an important thing, what do they believe about themselves or the world that is wrong? And that's an important question for me to know. So once I've done those 4, Then I go and do another overarching outline where I put it all together. It's very time consuming.
It's so important though, and I'm sitting here as a writer, I'm sitting here taking craft notes and going, what do they know about, what do they think that is wrong?
What do you, yeah,
Yeah,
what,
I'm gonna go home and
themselves
start.
or the world
Yeah,
that is wrong.
I'm going back to work right now
Okay,
with that.
all right.
Other questions?
Yes.
Can you reveal a little bit about what makes them troublesome women?
Oh, well, a little bit, you know, I mean, and I think troublesome is the perfect word for them. I mean, they are kind of stirring things up. I don't think most of them are not setting out to cause trouble, but when they make changes, it kind of disturbs the water. And one thing I was thinking about, you know, troublesome, I don't know if other people like Shakespeare. I like Shakespeare. You'll remember in The Taming of the Shrew, Catherine's monologue at the end says, "A woman moved is like a fountain troubled." And so in that way, these women are moved, and it creates some ripples for, you know, their families, their lives, their communities, and ultimately the world. So that's what I can tell you without giving away too much of the plot.
Good trouble.
Good trouble for sure. Yes, my dear.
So you cook, you quilt, you write. Is your day strictly scheduled to give you?
I am pretty scheduled, yes. I love a day, as I am someone who's a plotter, I also plot my life. And I love my, my day timer, as we call them, my agenda, more than anyone you ever saw. I block time, I do time blocking. And I usually spend on, not when I'm on book tour, but Sunday afternoon, I sit down and spend probably a good hour with my planner and figure out what's the work I have to get done. And I have things divided up, so silly, into A's, B's, or C's. So the A things are things I have to do. The B's are things I ought to do. The C's are things I like to do. And I make sure there's some of each. And so because, you know, I want to have time for just fun things too, because if you don't live life, you really can't write about it.
Yeah, because I admire that because I do life as a pantser.
And you know what? But that's just your style that works for you. That's good too. Sometimes I wish I were a little more spontaneous, but I haven't been able to make it work.
Put it on your schedule.
I'll put it on my schedule. Learn to be spontaneous. Yeah, that's a good plan. I feel like did you have a question or not, the lady in pink? No, maybe not. You were just moving your hand to a more comfortable position. All right. Anybody else? Yes.
You said you had a King Charles Cavalier. We had one too. Lovely dogs. Do you incorporate any kind of pets in your studio?
I didn't this time, but in 2021, I think that one came out. I wrote a book called The Restoration of Celia Fairchild. It has 2 little cavaliers on the front. My dog thinks that book is about her. You know, it's funny, cavaliers are great dogs. A lot of writers have cavaliers because cavaliers are just, their whole world is, I don't know, what do you want to do? And if you say, well, what I want to do is sit in the office and write all day, they're like, great, let's do that. So she's just there in her little blue donut, you know.
Thinking you're the most wonderful.
Yeah, no, she is just attached to me. So she's a great little companion. Yes.
You mentioned that you were at a writer's workshop and that's where you sort of, you know, who you are. What had brought you to that workshop?
What had brought me to, so this lady is asking that I had mentioned that I went to a writer's workshop and that's how I sort of moved into writing seriously. I'd always written, I want to be clear, I'd written since I could hold a pencil. It just never occurred to me to do it, you know, as a profession. What had brought me to that workshop was my family and I had recently moved to Mexico. We had moved to Cuernavaca, Mexico. No, not San Miguel. Cuernavaca is, oh, I'm very bad. I only know left and right. Oh, no, it was actually in Tecate. So we had moved there and I to be frank, I had had a baby not that long before, and I was suffering from postpartum depression and culture shock at the same time. It was a rough year. And some girlfriends had come down to see me in Mexico and see how I was doing, and I think they realized I wasn't doing very well. And I now have come to understand that there was some shenanigans behind my back, maybe them contacting my husband. So they called up and they said, hey, we're going to this spa. You should come. And I was like, I got the 3 kids, and that sounds expensive, and that's not gonna happen. And they were like, no, you should go. I was like, no, he's never gonna go for that. And he was like, well, call Brad, ask him. So I called my husband, I said, hey, Pam and Deb wanna, and he was like, yes, great, go. And I was like, huh. So I went off to this spa, Rancho La Puerta. And there was a lot of exercising, and I like exercising, but not for like 9 hours a day. And I was looking on the schedule, and there was a writer's workshop that met 2 hours a day. And I thought, excellent, no sweating involved. And so that's how I ended up there, practically by accident. And I will tell you, this is a mother thing. So, I had been writing just for myself, for fun, for a long time. And I thought, well, I'll go to this thing. And I thought, maybe there'd be maybe 10 people. There was 40. And it was a big room. I mean, maybe it wasn't 40, but it felt like 1,000. It was a lot more people than I had thought. And I got really nervous, and I almost didn't go. And then I heard my mother's voice in my head. And it said, what do you care? We will never see these people again. And I thought, okay, well, I'll stay for a day and see if I like it. And yeah, so that's how that happened.
So go to a spa with your girlfriends and see what happens.
So you know what? You never know what's going to change your life. You don't, which is one of the fabulous, I bet every person in this room can point to a moment where they could have so easily done something different, and the fact that they didn't is like why they are where they are. Life is fabulous and amazing. Yeah. Anybody else?
I guess we will, if there's no more questions, I guess we will go to book signing.
All right.
Once again, let's thank Marie and Jessica. Poe & Company still has books for sale. We'd appreciate you supporting them. I'd also like to thank the library staff for arranging these events, Amy Perry. And we'd like to try to keep the book signing line as orderly as possible over on the my left side of the room, maybe you're right, and try to be mindful of the cameras. In a few weeks, you'll be able to revisit this on the Gwinnett County Library website if you want to revisit and maybe you missed something you want to hear. And I just have to say, there's some of us who miss those Jell-O salads our grandmothers used to make. And there is a book in the library that brings back some of those Jell-O salads. Thank you all so much for coming. Enjoy your day.